Welcome back to the BestWorst52 podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Lewa. So it's been about 10 months since I've recorded my last episode, and there's been a lot of changes that have happened. So most of you know, I was living in Atlanta for about 18 months, but I've moved recently back to St. Louis, which was a big deal. Took a job back at my old university, Washington University in St. Louis. It's been a great move, and I'm super grateful to be back. So that's a huge move. The second thing is I turned 50, which is a pretty big milestone for most of us in our lives, where there's a lot to think about. And when you turn 50, you start thinking about mortality and what's really important in life, and what are some of the lessons you learn along the way with every journey. And for me, I started really thinking about two areas. One is strength and kindness. For some reason, that's been something that's been on my mind. And so that's the topic of today's podcast. With that being said, I definitely want to provide a few reflections on Atlanta. I've said this a couple times to people, but Atlanta is that city that I think everybody should visit. You know, I don't know what the public reputation is of Atlanta, but if you think music, food, if you think entertainment, if you think everything in a big city and traffic, that all exists in Atlanta, and it's been amazing. And one of the things I appreciated the most about my time in Atlanta is reconnecting with old friends, my fraternity brothers, former students, and also just the people I met there, the new people. I met a lot of really, really great new people from Atlanta and from all over the country who've moved to that great city. And so definitely looking forward to the next time I'm out there. That made me really start thinking about my journeys around strength and kindness and different places that I've lived throughout my life. And one of the things I learned through working with, I think it was Camp Wyman, when they took us through a education training, they said that learning happens in reflection. So looking back, you know, is where the learning actually happens. It doesn't necessarily happen while you're going through a particular experience or reading a particular book, or being trained on a particular thing. It happens in reflection. And so I've had a lot of time to think about these last 50 years, and it led me to this thought around strength and kindness. So I've had some really high highs and some low lows, and I had a lot of questions around, well, what keeps me going? What's the strength that keeps me going? And it made me think about a conversation I had with one of my best friends. He's actually a brother to me. His name is Matt Kellogg, and he was talking about his company going through a training where they were talking about what kindness actually means. And, you know, I've always thought that I was a kind person, and I always thought that I was a nice person, but he really helped me kind of separate those two things. Nice being more accommodating and kind of being pushed over and putting yourself aside for others, not for always the best reasons, but maybe for comfort or the concern of making people feel uncomfortable. Whereas kind is telling the truth, being honest, being fair. Still maybe some characteristics of being nice, but it's the strength to do the right thing, to say the right thing, to be honest, even when it's difficult, to tell the truth, even when it's difficult. And I think that that's the kind thing. There's that saying, clear is kind, and I don't know who to attribute that to, but being very clear, being honest, being direct with people. And so there's a lot of strength and kindness. And so, you know, as I think about even my mom's reflections on me and how she saw me as this sweet kid, you know, I always thought, well, maybe it's the kindness. But I also grew up in an area that was, some of you know, working class, definitely a lot of single parents, young parents who were raising kids like my mom and others in my neighborhood. And, you know, I grew up around a lot of, you know, tough people. And, you know, when you grow up in California, you know, you think it's the center of the universe until you kind of travel and meet people in other places. So I went to Iowa and then eventually ended up in Waltham, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. And I got to tell you, in Boston, those are some of the toughest people I met. You know, I remember, you know, first of all, at Brandeis, I was making $24,000 a year. I was married at the time, and my wife was working part-time. Our daycare was probably over $900 a month. So more than half of my take-home was going towards paying daycare. And I remember a moment at Brandeis where we got invited to Six Flags with some students, free tickets. My wife, my kid, and I, we were super excited. We went out there and had a great time with the kiddo, and then it came time to eat. And I remember we had done something with our budgeting where we messed it up. And I really hope that, I don't think he remembers this, but we had ordered a bunch of food at this restaurant at Six Flags and went to run our card, and the card declined. And so I looked at my wife, and somehow some big bill, when we looked it up, had cleared and wiped us out. And my kid was crying because he was hungry, and I was so embarrassed and she was so embarrassed. I think we were both ashamed. And, thank God that kids don't remember such things like us adults, but, you learn a lot of lessons about that. So it was kind of rough living out there. But the one thing I do remember out there, besides being broke, was the strength of the people. And also, too, like the directness. Like, if you've ever lived in some of these East Coast towns, they're not Midwest nice. They're not even Southern nice. They're pretty direct with their feelings and their thoughts, and at least you know where you stand with them. And on the other side of that, they were some of the most loving, sweet people. I remember one of my coworkers, Carrie, and her husband, John, inviting our family over to their family's home. I think it was for Thanksgiving, and we had a lot of fun. Or maybe it was Labor Day. It must have been something like that, where we rode jet skis. And anyway, just some of the kindest people, the most loving people, very strong people. But it made me think, so these people out here at Brandeis are tough, right? Some of these folks out here in the East Coast are tough. I'm a West Coast guy, and I think we're the center of the universe, but we're not, clearly, because I met some tough people, some strong people in Iowa, and then I'm at Brandeis. Well, I might have told this story, so please forgive me, but there were some students who were living in a building that I was working in, and I was younger. I was 27 years old, still, young and active and fit, and they saw me and they said, "Hey, would you play on our flag football team?" And I agreed to. First of all, I questioned it. I said, "I'm staff. I can't play flag football with y'all." And they're like, "No, there's no rules against it. You can play it. And in fact, we're looking for a quarterback. You can play quarterback." And so I was like, great. Stroked my ego, gave me a chance to connect with students a little bit, play some flag football. And the thing at Brandeis at that time, this is 2002, 2003, was this guy pulled together a group of people. And one of our guys named Josh Zetlin, we named ourselves the Flying Zetlins. We went out there and we played. And I guess they had gotten their butts kicked every season. But for some reason, one of the guys that year who recruited me ended up recruiting another guy in grad school who was a former football player at Alabama State University. He also recruited another guy who was a starting lineman at Mount Holyoke, or maybe it was St. Mary's, or one of these other smaller schools, but they played college football and they were doing grad school at Brandeis. And so somehow, and then he recruited this guy from California who ran track. And somehow we had this stacked team. I don't know where I fit into that category, let me just be honest, with these athletes. But I guess I had an arm back then. And so here I am, starting quarterback for them. And we go out and we play. And the one thing they warned us for this flag football team was, these guys out here are tough. The football team and the fraternity, Brandeis did not have a football team. It was the baseball team and the fraternities were the toughest teams. There were guys who probably played football back home, and big guys. And they didn't just pull flags. They would tackle you and pull your flags. So that's what they warned us. But I was a bigger guy lifting weights, and I had all these athletes with me. And so we kind of rolled up all the other teams, the non-fraternity, non-baseball team folks. We rolled them up. We beat them pretty good, but we came up against these guys and they were tough. And, we beat some of them, we tied some of them, we lost to some of them. But I just remember feeling pretty confident until we went to playoffs. And this is where this idea of strength comes in. First of all, let me just say this. I was getting tackled during the first playoff game, which we lost. I'll go ahead and kill the punchline now. We lost. I remember getting tackled and complaining to the ref that these guys are tackling. And the guys on the other team said, "Quit crying. It's football, sweetheart." And I just remember looking at them and just nodding my head like, yep, this is where we're at. The ref looked at me and shrugged. So this is what we were doing. So we were going to take tackles. I was going to have to, run directly into these guys, shoulder down, no helmet on. Probably not the smartest thing, but that's the game we were in. And I was getting beat up pretty good after taking a lot of hits. We had this super fast guy who I could throw the ball up to and he could catch it, score touchdowns, but these teams were athletes as well. So anyway, we get to near the end of the game and I get hit one too many times and my knee's hurting, my thumb's hurting. I'm just a mess. I'm beat up as a staff member. And I wanted to quit. So I said, while our defense was on the field, I told the guy who recruited me, I said, I'm done. Put somebody else in at quarterback. And I quit. I officially quit. And I remember this kid who I've known at this point for maybe a couple months was like, no, you're not. You're going to go back in there. You're not going to quit. You're going to play quarterback. We have nobody else. You're going to play quarterback. We need you in there. And I remember looking at this kid like he was not going to let me sit on that sidelines. So I did. I went back in. We played the rest of the game out. We lost. And I left and I was just ashamed. I was embarrassed. I got beat up so good that I tapped out. I quit. These college kids had the best of me. And it took this guy in my ear saying, you're not quitting. You're going to get up and you're going to go, for me to get up and get out there and finish that game. And I carried that shame with me for a while. Just super embarrassed that I quit inside and had let them down, even if I finished the game. So the next year I moved to St. Louis, and there's no more intramural sports. And I'm keeping up with these guys because at this point, Facebook and MySpace are both working. So I'm keeping up with them. I come to find out that team that we started and put together, they went on the next year to win the championship. And so maybe it's because I got out of the way, but maybe it's because we started something together, and me just giving that little bit of extra that didn't come from me. That came from that young student in my ear, not letting me give up, was pretty powerful. The second thing that I think about is a recent event that I went through. I had at a recent event, I won't go into the details on it, but I just had some real disappointing news here in St. Louis, and was just really hurt. Was losing sleep, and was starting to doubt myself, who I was, and I'd been sitting on it. And I ended up going out to lunch with a few friends actually, and I just knew I wasn't myself. Lack of sleep, just starting to really question just a lot of things. And there was one of the people who was there, her name was Chloe, and I remember thinking, I got to tell Chloe while I'm acting funny. And so when we all left the restaurant, I just told her I'd give her a call from the phone, and I called her and I just relayed what I had just been through recently. And it was just again, some pretty hurtful stuff. And Chloe went on to give me one of the best pep talks, better than the kid at Brandeis, although he was pretty good. But hers had more clear direction. She said to me, Josh, you are such a wonderful human being, and you are strong, and the strength you have draws people close to you. And I, for some reason, had forgot about this idea of strength again, right? Here's the quitter from Brandeis. Here's the guy who's just gotten beat up in the life situation and was feeling pretty down. And Chloe just spoke strength into my life. And it came through my phone so clearly. And I was just amazed that, again, in this very low moment, that she could just cut to the core of what I needed to hear. And I remember just as I continued to heal through that process, I remember just holding on to her voice saying, you are strong and you have strength, and your strength draws people to you. That reminder was just so critical for me. Her just speaking into me. It was just amazing. So thank you, Chloe. And so the final story that I can think about as I provide this short podcast, and again, I can't promise I'm going to get another one out before the new year. Maybe I'll interview some people. I know some folks have been asking me to record, and I've got some really good feedback about these solo episodes. So if you don't like it, please bear with me. But for those of you who enjoy it, here you go. The last story circles back to my son. So I'd mentioned that embarrassing moment, that experience at Six Flags. Again, thankfully, hopefully my son doesn't remember that. I know that his mom and I remember it. It's kind of a hard moment. But that wasn't the last time that I would have financial woes. And I mean, some of them are public. Some, it doesn't take too much effort to look into them. And I remember just making some decisions that were not sound and reasonable, and put me and my son in some predicaments. And again, I can't speak to what he remembers or not, but just not having my stuff together financially. And I carried this guilt with me. There was one time where I even asked my son, I said, when he was 5, I said, hey, I'm going to take you to Memphis. It's like a 4-hour trip from St. Louis. I always would say, I'm taking you to Memphis one day, and I remember when he was a teenager, I said, hey, I never took you to Memphis. Do you want to go? And he was like, what are you talking about? I was like, oh, thank God. Again, thank God that, memory fades for some things that are traumatic, or even some things that are just not as important as they are to us adults. But I was thinking about never taking my son on a proper trip. I mean, we had gone to see family in California, but never had taken a proper trip. And so a few summers ago, I took him and Angel, his girlfriend, to Cancun. It was going to be a real vacation, all inclusive. They were both over 21. I figured, they can party, they can have a good time, and Dad could lay around and party a little bit, but just enjoy ourselves, and really take my son on a way better than Memphis trip. Sorry, Memphis, but way better than Memphis trip. So we get there, we're having a good time. The kids go on, an excursion. The Harold and Angel, they're not kids, they're adults. They go on an excursion, and there's evening events, there's restaurants, like all the things that you can imagine at an all-inclusive. And this is just a unique and new experience for, I think, all three of us at that time. And so at some point, we all reconvene at one of the pools that overlooks the water, the ocean, and the ocean's, crystal blue. It's just beautiful and gorgeous. And Angel's, I don't know, I think she might have been in the water or off to the side somewhere, but Harold and I start having a conversation. And I just start having a real open conversation with Harold, and I just start apologizing to him. So I just started apologizing to him about all the mess ups I'd made in my life, all the financial screw ups, and that put us in odd positions. I mean, evicted from an apartment. He didn't even know why we moved, but we got evicted. I got evicted from an apartment. Had to move down to this tiny spot. Quitting a job without a job and not having enough money to maintain my own place, and him having to stay with his mom his senior year while I had to stay with friends until eventually I could get a roommate, but still him not living with me. I mean, even just not being able to provide him the life that I thought I would be able to provide him financially. And it was hard. It was definitely a very hard thing. So, I guess it gets me emotional. I was emotional clearly at that time when him and I were having that conversation. And my son looked at me and he said, but look at us now, Dad. Look around, look at the ocean, look at this pool, look at what we're doing, look at us now. This is incredible, we're here now. I forgive you, Dad, and thank you. And he went on to say some other things for him and me to know, but I just remember it's funny how you raise your kid for so many years and how somehow they end up being the ones who pick you up. And even times they don't know, but that one was clearly a one where I'd been holding on to all this pain and guilt. I mean, guilt from Six Flags back in 2002 to things that happened over the years. And here is my son just speaking strength into me. And so it's just, we were good, recovered, and we had a great rest of the trip. I mean, it was just probably my favorite trip I've ever taken. It's probably the best trip that I've ever taken. And I got to share that experience with Harold and Angel. So, looking back at those three stories, I just started thinking about this again, back to this idea of strength and kindness, and what does that mean, right? And what does that mean at this stage of my life right now? And I guess I have a few takeaways. One of them is, people say strength comes from within, strength comes from within. And I think that's true. I think that inner strength is really critical and really important. And I think that's something that should be worked on. I think that people, whether you need to go to counseling or whatever, but you really need to work on that. However, I do think that that's not the only place that strength comes from. I think strength can also come from having the right people around you who can speak strength into you. You know, whether it was that young student at Brandeis, whether it was Chloe at the right time saying the right things, or whether it was Harold when I was carrying this weight of guilt, relieving it and speaking into me. You need to have good people around you who can consistently speak into you, which means on the opposite end of that, if you have people who are constantly tearing you down and not doing right by you and trying to make you play smaller than who you really are, you should probably consider finding ways to keep them at a distance, even if you can't totally get rid of them. And some of them you just have to get rid of. But what's more important here is that you should have people around you who can speak strength into you. So while strength does come from within, have people around you who speak strength into you. Those are the people you need in your life. And I've been very fortunate, whether it's I've known them for 2 months or I've known them all their lives. Yeah, it's just critical. And then my last point here is that you can speak strength into other people. I don't know about you, but, I think it's, for some people, they're really good at giving compliments or speaking what's on their mind. It took me a long time, both in my personal sense and in the professional world, to be able to just provide positive feedback. I would just would hold things in, even if I was thinking it. Maybe my wife was looking pretty gorgeous one night, and I would just think, oh, she's looking gorgeous, but I would never say anything to her. Definitely a big failure, my first marriage, and or whether it's staff members who were just longing to understand if they were doing the right thing, if they're doing their job well, and my inability to tell them yes and absolutely, and here's specifically how you're doing a good job. But I just have never, early in my days, I just was not good at sharing what I felt out loud to people who I quite frankly cared about, some that I loved. And as time has gone by, I've learned that that's a really important thing, and I do that more now. I do that with my boss. I do that with my former boss. I do that with my friends. I tell my son I think that he's the greatest, and I love him. And these are not fake compliments. These are true things. These are things that I really believe and feel. And that goes back to that kindness, right? Which is, it's not being fake. It's not being nice. It's not being accommodating. It's when things are up and you feel them and they're good, you should say them. Take time to speak kindness into people around you. You just never know. You never know if that's the moment that's going to get them through a hard time. So that's it. Strength and kindness. Thanks for going along with me on this journey. So I'll try to get, maybe one more episode before the new year. Otherwise, I'm hoping to round up, a few people here and there who I think will be interesting to tell their stories about their best, worst thing. There's a lot of podcast content out there. A couple of my favorites out there that really kind of focus in on people telling their stories. So I love that this is a thing, that this is something beyond what I thought about in 2020, and that people who have higher listenership and higher platforms are starting to have this discussion, and so I'm grateful for that. But if this is going to be placed, and so I think I'm going to continue to look for some interesting folks that you might enjoy, so that you don't have to keep listening to my solo podcast. But so be kind to yourselves out there, folks. I definitely embrace that strength and make sure that you have good people around you. All right, love you all. Thank you for listening to the Best Worst Thing podcast. I'm your host, Josh Walila. Music is produced by Josh One. You can follow him at Boomnote on Instagram and Twitter, and Josh One on Spotify. Our episodes are edited by Cooled Jets Music. You can follow him at Cooled Jets Music on Instagram. Our marketing is designed by Francesca Daniels. You can find her at FrankandKitty24 on Instagram. And our overall design is by Inspired Design with Ryan Daniels. You can find them at getinspired.design on Instagram. Thank you for listening to The Best Worst Thing.
This one's for the good times, and this one's for the bad. This one's for the day that was the best we ever had. This one's for my good friends, and this one's for my foes, the ones who get up up on new skin and do not even know.